We're good.
We are live.
All right. I want to thank everyone for taking 1 hour of your time today to discuss West Tech's our NCRR 500 for financial services webinar and cybersecurity. So I really appreciate the time everyone's taken today. On the call today is Jim Peterson, who's our guest speaker. He's a principal solutions advisor for one of our strong partners, ConnectWise. Also on the call is Jason Hansen, West Tech's director of cybersecurity, and myself, Andrew Chapman. I am the director of sales at West Tech Solutions here in Westchester. So I really want to thank everyone again for their time. I know time is very valuable. This is a very informative webinar and open. So please, any questions, please ask during, after, whenever. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I want to hand off the mic to Jim Peterson, or smarter than me on the cyber side. So I'm going to let him run through this.
All right, thank you, Andrew, and hey, everybody. Today we're going to dig into, obviously, NYCRR 500, but we're going to bookend that with a conversation around bad actor activities and the steps you can actually take to protect your business. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Now, when we use the term cybersecurity, we always hear it's the practice of protecting systems from digital attack. But we know it's a lot more than that in the world today, because reputations are at risk, revenue is at risk, team and client information is at risk. So we really want to look at it as a holistic solution, not just an asset or data solution. Now, the next step in this is after we think through what it's covering, is what are we covering it with? What are we using to protect the environment? And when we say cybersecurity, we often go straight to the tools we're leveraging to protect the environments. But we have to really think through the process, the people, the BCDR solutions, assessments, everything that kind of completes that holistic view of protecting environments. Because without the process and people, the systems just decay over time. They can be put in properly on day 1, but by day 45, they may have needed an update. They may have needed a configuration change. If we don't have the people and process around to make sure that that happens, we start to become more risk averse, or we start to see more risk in our environment. And we'll hit on BCDR quite a bit through this conversation, because of the fact that we always want to be in charge of our own restoration. We never want to hand that activity off to the bad actors, because that maximizes payments, increases delay, and puts revenue at risk. And then we don't know where we're at in any situation unless we have great assessments. And we'll talk about a few options for assessments as we go through the NYCRR 500 regulations. The next thing we want to jump into is just a couple of term definitions, because we hear this stuff out here all the time. We hear attack, incident, and breach, and a lot of times they get used interchangeably. We want to put a hard definition on that because it means something, especially in the financial industry. And when we talk through these, we want to try to differentiate when we can keep something at bay and not allow it to get to the data. Because when we say attack, we mean the things that are going on all the time. We have millions of attacks going on right now. We're all being attacked. Our emails are being attacked. Our penetration or our external systems are being attacked. Our PCs are being attacked if they're on the internet. It happens all the time. And we have a lot of solutions in place to defend those attacks. But if one of those attacks gets past a piece of technology meant to stop it, it's called an incident. So it's bypassed something and it's gotten farther than it should have, but it hasn't got to the data yet. Now, once it gets to the data, we call that a breach. And a breach means they've accessed the data, they've deleted it, modified it, changed it, viewed it. They've done something to the information inside our network. Now, the breach word we never use, and if you're in the financial industry, you likely know this already, but it's something we want the professionals to tell us, somebody who is authorized to define a breach and make sure it's actually happened in your environment. So we always want to keep those terms that we're using when we're talking to an attack or an incident. Now, when we think of bad actors that are doing these things, they typically fall into one of 3 buckets. We have the typical solo hackers, and this can also be small groups of attackers. And they're typically they're a little limited on their ability to scale. We don't see them as much as we used to. This used to be the commonplace or the common bad actor 10 years ago, but it's obviously changed since then, but they still are available, and AI is helping them become more effective in the world. We also have nation states, and typically this isn't a small business risk because they're typically going after other nation states or looking at large businesses with intellectual property. The real challenge that we have as small business or medium-sized business owners is organized crime. The challenge with organized crime is these organizations are ran like businesses. They have HR teams, they have recruiting teams, they do bonus structures for attacks. I mean, they are very, very sophisticated. And the biggest challenge we have with these type of entities is their ability to scale. They may find a vulnerability out there in the wild, and they can apply large masses of people to that vulnerability to try to scale attack across industries or groups of people. So they're the real challenge in our world today. Now, if we know organized crime is our challenge, how are they getting in? And it won't be surprising that roughly 80% of the time when we have an incident or a breach, meaning they've gotten past a layer of security, it's people-based. We've done something to allow them to get in. We've either clicked the link or we have reused a password or we've given up our credentials or access in some fashion. And the most common one, obviously, is that credential breach. It's roughly 49% of incidents or breaches are credential related. And our biggest offense to stop credential related attacks or identity-based attacks is multi-factor authentication. And if you're in this world, you've probably heard about this a lot, and we'll dig into multi-factor authentication in a few minutes, but just know that that's like the biggest way to defend against it. And with it being 50% of the problem, it massively reduces the risk or exposure of your business. The second one is phishing, and we all get phishing emails, right? Again, we're going to touch on that a little bit deeper in a second, but we use security awareness training and email filtering to try and thwart that or at least minimize the impact of the availability of phishing in our environment. And that last piece is the exploits. And these are going to be vulnerabilities in software and hardware in our environment that are just inherent. Roughly there's around 7,000 vulnerabilities that are released every single quarter. So we have to fix those vulnerabilities with patching and assessments because the patching will stop the problem or typically replace or fix the problem. But there's often times where things happen or people turn over and we have equipment that we've forgotten about in an environment. And without a continual assessment to check on the equipment that's out there, it's hard to know that something needs to be patched if we're not sure what it is. So if we know the bad actors, who they are, they're organized crime, we know they get in because we've made a mistake. What are they doing when they get inside our environment? And they'll typically start with an investigation. If they breach the environment, meaning they got to the data, they're going to start looking around. They want to understand the value of the information in your environment because they'll have three sources of revenue. They can either ransom you, meaning they make it so you have to pay to gain access back to your system. They'll extort you, meaning you have to pay to get them to stop from releasing your information, or they'll just flat out sell your data. And this whole process, they want to understand the maximum payout that they can get. So they have to investigate and understand what type of data you have. As a financial industry, you have very, very important information. So they're typically going to go on the higher end of extortion, maybe ransom, depending on the type of attack that they can do. But they're going to understand this environment very, very well. It's surprising how they can infiltrate and get to data quickly. From there, once they understand what they have, they're going to take it. Because if we stop the attack before they get to the ransom or extortion, then they can also always sell the data. So if they want to steal it first, make sure they have a copy of it so that they can have some level of control if we get good in the middle of the attack. From there, once they've taken the data, they know what they have, they're going to try to make it so you can't recover your environment. This is one of the best steps, right? Bad actor steps that they take. Because if they can control your restoration, your ability to access data, they'll maximize their payout every single time. From there, they'll modify or change or delete your production environment. And this is when we typically notice it. This is the challenging part because they've gotten all the way through investigation, exfiltration, and ECDR manipulation. And now they're messing with your production and you can't get your data anymore. And this is when the ransom request will come in. Now, an interesting fact is this typically takes roughly 200 days, which is a very long time, and shows the sophistication and patience that these organized crime units have in gaining access to your data to maximize that payout. And this is one style of attack. There are multiple styles of attacks. There's also the click and encrypt style of attack, where you click a link and it automatically starts encrypting all of the connected drives on your system. We still see these, but they're just not as effective anymore because of solutions like endpoint detection and response or managed detection and response that can stop that activity. But they're still out there in the wild. Now, we talked about ransom extortion and data sale already, so I'll just slide through this or run through this slide, but just understand that ransom and extortion typically are the highest payout. When they go to data sale, that's typically go to the dark web to try and sell information. But obviously, it's no surprise that the bad actors who are gaining access through us, who would take the time to investigate and do that long 200-day process, they're doing this for financial gain. And the financial gain in 2022 was roughly 10.3 billion. Now, this is an extremely small number compared to the total cost of organized crime. This is the extortion and ransom payout that was reported to the FBI. But we know that not all extortions or ransoms get reported to the FBI. Oftentimes, small businesses don't want their competition or teams to know that they were hacked. So they pay the ransom, pay the extortion, and they move on with their day. In addition, this is just those payouts. So lost revenue, reputation damage, and revenue loss, all of those kind of add to this number. So we know that while this is a big number, it's the smallest possible number we have. So that leads us to, we think of $10.3 billion as a lot of money, but it's made up by a lot of little numbers. And just to get an understanding of some of the values of your personal information on the dark web, you'll see a few dollar figures come up. And knowing that a social security number is worth somewhere between $1 and $3, a passport scan, or we say proof of existence, would be roughly $15. That could also be a driver's license scan, and other documents that prove your life, right? Bank and credit card information is typically based on balance, but normally start around $80 or $100. The medical record is the interesting one because a medical record, and we often get the question, why is a medical record so much more valuable than everything else? It's because it has so much of your personal information on one piece of paper. It's going to have your birth date, maybe your social security number, if depending on what type of institution you're working with, but your insurance information, your address. It's going to have a lot about you. It's going to have your medical challenges or any issues you have. So it's a very valuable piece of personal information. And if you think of a release of 500,000 social security numbers versus a release of 500,000 medical records, there's a big delta in the cost. And I'm sure if we put financial up here, it would be somewhere between that online medical or banking information and medical record. Now, specifically for the NYCRR 500 cybersecurity requirements for financial services, if you're on this, you probably are in this industry and you've likely heard of this regulation. A couple of common things to understand about this process is what they're trying to achieve with this is just generally protecting your institutions and your client's information. Now, the effective date on this was back in 2017 with 18 months to bridge from the regulation release to being in compliance with the regulation. So we're well into that process. And I know the guys at West Tech do this quite a bit. They understand that, hey, we need to move forward. And not all businesses understand where they fall into this process. And there's a lot of core areas that we'll talk about because if we read this roughly 14-page document, we're going to see that there are a large amount of policies that's necessary, a large amount of procedures that's necessary, and things we need to do with the people. So cybersecurity programs, policies, people, assessments, testing, audit information, all of that is going to fall under the cybersecurity program. And we're following the NIST CFS, or cybersecurity framework. And if we look through that, we're really trying to say, well, how do we protect organizations? First, we need to identify what's out there. We need to protect it. We need to detect challenges. If we have a challenge, we need to respond. And then once we've responded, we need to recover. It's a really great framework for understanding how to continually protect an environment. And the NYCRR really follows this well. And we'll go into a few examples here in a minute. Now, if we start the conversation around people, we're going to hit really people, process, and protection. And there's really three areas of people that we want to be concerned with when we talk about NYCRR. First is the CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer. Every financial institution, and really every small and mid-sized business, should have somebody who's responsible for the security of the organization. And specifically for NYCRR, we have to identify that person. Now, it's typically someone within the company, but it can be outsourced if necessary, but it's got to be a qualified individual. This is going to be the person responsible who's running communication and will be reporting any incidents that come. If they, unfortunately, they don't, hopefully they don't come, but if they do, it's the person responsible to report that. Second area of people is really the cybersecurity personnel. And again, this can be inside the company or it could be an outside third party, but we have to make sure we have qualified people to follow that identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. We want to make sure we can do that efficiently and effectively with the right team members. And the last group is really the entity users. And when we think of the entity users' role in NYCRR 500, it's really to make sure that they have the most restrictive visibility into non-public information as possible. So we want to make sure that if they don't need access to it, that they don't get access to it. And we'll talk a little bit about access management in a minute, but it really applies to this category because the days of opening up the H drive or the I drive to all personnel and giving them large access to big groups of data has just changed. We need to be more protective because if there's a breach, if someone is attacked and they accidentally have access to non-public information, it can be exposed to the bad actor. From people, we can move to processing. You'll see all the policies that need to be created as part of the NYCRR. There's a lot of them in here, and some of them really line up well with the identify, some line up with detect, protect, respond, recover. So you'll have different ones falling into different buckets, but we're going to focus on a couple key ones here. If we look closer to the bottom, risk assessments, incident response, and then kind of in the middle, the network and system security and monitoring. If we think of the protection piece of this, we need to understand what we have in our environment. We need to understand who we contact and what policy or process we follow if we were to have an issue. We need to have a general understanding of what is in our environment so that we can properly protect it. And that does lead us into our assessment side of things. Now, the assessment side of things is one of the most straightforward piece of all of these conversations. And they typically fall in one of two buckets. One side of the assessment really leads us to what do we have in our environment? And the other side of the assessment continuum says, what is the risk for those equipment pieces that are out there? And I know, so we've been in the IT space for a long time. We often go into environments where we go to do discovery and the small business owner will say, I didn't realize we still had that on the network. I thought we retired that 5 years ago. I didn't know we still had that internet connection from 3 years ago. We've switched to cable internet or fiber internet, and we still had the old DSL line hooked up and connected. It happens often, way too often to be a coincidence. So if we look at that network and security side, that understanding what we have, having a team come in to do a full audit of every piece of equipment in your environment, every connection, everything that is accessible from either within or outside your environment that might give access to your environment. We want to just understand what's out there. The network is going to tell you the equipment and software. The security is going to tell you what's deployed to protect it. And Jason, I know you probably get a lot of these type of assets or assessments out there into the world because we really want to understand first what we have.
Oh yeah. And the unknown devices on the network is the biggest issue. I was just doing a scan the other day of a client. They turned on a light switch in a closet, and that turned on some equipment they didn't even realize was still there. And because our alerting system just started showing a bunch of vulnerabilities, and we're like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, we turned on a light switch, and now some equipment's lighting up." So there's that ever-present risk when you don't understand what's on your network, where it's located, and the current state that it's in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Knowing what you have is really key, number one. Then we can flip to the other side, which is the risk, which falls into the risk and vulnerability assessments. And these are really outlined in NYCRR 500 as a requirement for financial institutions. They need to do a risk assessment, and they need to do the way they define it as at least biannual, but recommending recurring vulnerability scans. And they tell you a little bit different story. Risk is just assessing a risk of everything in your environment, putting a score to it so you can understand what are the highest risks, what are the medium risks, and what are the low risks, so that you can sort them and start attacking them in a specific manner. Vulnerability is just going to show you the challenges in the environment with hardware, software, and areas that either need to be patched, replaced, or updated to make sure that we can reduce vulnerabilities on hardware and software. Both of these tell a little bit different story, but both are critically important for understanding the risks in any environment. So moving on. So what can we do, right? If we know we have NYCRR has these regulations, they require risk, they require vulnerability, they require an incident response plan. These are all things that are done to understand what can be done basically, and then how we respond. But in the middle of that is actually protecting and recovering the environment. And we show what's called defense in depth, or a layered defense strategy. And all it's saying is, I'm going to put multiple pieces of cybersecurity technology in place to try and stop, at worst case, an attack from becoming an incident. It may bypass one layer of attack, but we want the other solutions to step in to stop it from becoming a breach. And that's going to be the green part. These are all of our protection systems. Now, unfortunately, if we ever got to a breach, or if we had a natural disaster or physical hardware failure, a lot of times we'll have to fall to our business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And we'll talk a little bit about a specific scenario, situation, or a theory that we can follow, 3-2-1, to make sure we're protected in that way. But at the end of the day, whenever we're falling to our BCDR plan, whether again it's cyber attack, it's natural disaster, or it's equipment failure, we want to make sure we're full in control. And you'll notice that we don't use the term backup. And it's kind of a technical thing, because backup, like we talked about cyber being tools, process, and people, backup is a tool. And we have to have the process that we follow and the people that do that process to get the complete business continuity disaster recovery, because we want to make sure that, again, we are always in control of our own restoration. We never want to hand that up to the bad actors. But in that step, we saw they want to attack and modify our BCDR solution. They want to make it so we can't recover. And this is where cybersecurity insurance really comes into play, or the most common place that cybersecurity insurance comes into play. Because once we have to hand over the restoration to the bad actors, we now likely have to pay them to recover. So this is where cybersecurity insurance comes in. Now, there's other areas where cybersecurity insurance can come in with supply chain issues or revenue challenges from outside parties or third-party attacks. But typically, when we're talking about it in this scenario, we're saying, hey, we were attacked and we had to pay. Now, when we think of the vulnerability side of things, the testing, we want to make sure that we are running that so that we can test out each of these layers to make sure they're working properly. Again, if we said, hey, we have tools, we have people, and we have process, if we're not following all three of those to make sure that they're protected at the highest level, we won't know unless we test it. Now, there are always vulnerabilities in hardware and software. Again, about every quarter, we have roughly 7,000, and that number is growing as the manufacturers and different SaaS applications and software vendors increase. But we really want to understand consistently what are we checking for, because we may patch something and then the next quarter we find a new vulnerability in that exact hardware and we have to patch it again. So constant testing and penetration tests are really critical to make sure we understand the environment. So if this is our layer, and again, I would say that this isn't your typical layer. This is just an example of a layered approach. How we find out what is right for you is typically through one of the assessments. Understanding the equipment you have, the type of business that you operate, and your risks. Once we know your risks, then we can go back and say, let's find the right solution to make sure we're mitigating as many or as much of that risk profile as possible. So security information and event manager may be in your future, may be part of your risk profile to stop, but at the same time, it may not be. So we have to understand that through these assessments. But if we look at some specific technologies that are spelled out in NYCRR 500, one of them is security awareness training. And we said, hey, roughly 80% of the time, people are the reason there's an incident or breach. and roughly 49% of the time it's credential based. We need to start educating on things that will reduce both the 50% and the 80%. And that's where security awareness training really comes in. It's two pieces of it. There's the education and testing part. We want to make sure we're educating people on the challenges, and then we want to make sure we're testing them to ensure that the education is working. At the end of the day, security awareness training is really about keeping people skeptical, making sure that they don't trust, unfortunately, right, most of the messages coming in, because AI has really improved the attack and the ability to trick the normal user. You know, if we think of when does security awareness typically kick in? It at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the morning, we're fired up, we got a lot of coffee on board, we are ready to go. You're not going to fool me. You know, I'm not going to click a link. I'm going to look at the email address. I'm going to do everything I need to do. But if you catch me at 11 at night and I've worked a 12-hour day and I'm really tired and an email comes in that looks reasonable, you might catch me. So I need to make sure that that security awareness training is consistent so that I'm aware even in my weakest times. Because if we look at a typical AI created phishing attempt, and I'll say we used to have a boring one up here that just said dear buyer and stuff that everybody would notice. But we caught this message a few months ago, and we're very impressed by it because this is, again, a completely AI created message from Karen Lynch using her signature profile, creating a false domain, and obviously identified to Curtis. Now, if it was me, it would be to Jim, it could be to Jason, it could be to Andrew, it could be to Warren, who I see online. At the end of the day, they're very smart at crafting these messages. And while they're still phishing in general, they're becoming more spear phishing or whaling, whichever term you want to use to say directed. But they're becoming very, very good. And this is easy to do in the AI world. When we look at this again, this is a very good message. So we have to be more and more skeptical because I could see a lot of people clicking this link thinking that it's a legit message.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, these tools are becoming just insanely impressive and incredibly scary. I a couple weeks ago, I wrote a little script that would pull and copy people's LinkedIn profiles, and then part of that to generate an email like this. But then I took it a step further and I had it generate a fake voice, an AI voice, and do a phone call. So it cost me $10 out of pocket. I had to make 10 calls to my friends because I had them volunteer to do security testing. And they were talking to an AI that was pretending to be a CEO of a company, trying to gather more information out of them. I did this one as job applications because that's one of the big ones we see. A lot of fake job applications get created, and then people apply and they're just gathering your info or having fake meetings, and it's just an AI voice doing all the talking and it's just gathering the data. It's become incredibly easy to do it, and it's only going to get worse every single day. There's a new French AI that I was just reading about this morning that has only been around for about 6 months, and already he's overtaken the #1 AIs in performance. Every day is going to be a new thing, and all we need now is the bad actors to start developing their own AI, using all the things they know, using the software as a services that they sell. And so we just have to be ever present. And whenever anyone asks me what is the most important cybersecurity thing, it is always security awareness training. And then it's more importantly, it's the follow up when users fail. Because we don't want to be bad or like, yeah, you kept failing, but we need to, because if you don't follow up, if you don't keep educating them and giving them different ways to see what they're possibly missing, you're just opening up the whole organization. One single click, now everyone bad actor can get full control. And, as we said, about 200 days before you might even notice it if you don't have the proper tools in place.
Yeah, couple of great points there that definitely would love to touch on. One is the culture of shaming someone who clicks a link versus the culture of supporting someone and praising them for raising their hand that they made a mistake. The best thing you can do if you accidentally click a link and you weren't sure, or you might have put your password into a wrong location, is to immediately notify your IT team and be like, I screwed up, right? I'm afraid that I did something wrong, because our human nature lends us to try and hide it. Like, oh, maybe nothing happens. And in most of the cases, nothing will happen then. You know, you don't see it then. You see it much later, and then you realize, oh, yeah, I did do that. So the culture of supporting and basically high-fiving people who raise their hand and admit it is where we really need to be. So that's great. Okay. Oh, and did want to touch on one other thing that you mentioned that I think was great. You know, we always talk about the process. How do we validate that a money wire or a transfer needs to happen? Well, for a long time, you know, it was email. Well, the bad actors got in the middle of that and created a big ruckus. And now, hopefully, your process includes eyes on, or at least eyes on for a specific amount of money. But we're always going to recommend that you work with your IT service provider or your IT team just to talk through your money transfer approval process, because a lot of times that falls into well, it's just it's a financial thing. It doesn't hit IT. But things that Jason's talking about, you know, we can trick you. You know, we could trick you into saying yes with eyes on, or at least voice. So continually modifying that and running your processes for specifically money transfer through your IT team would be critical of awareness. Okay, security awareness training, we're all on board. Now, the next big area that NYCRR points out, 500 points out, is leveraging multi-factor authentication. And again, if we touched on the fact that 80% of the time we're the problem, 50% of the time we've done something to give out our credentials on accident, multi-factor authentication drops that down from roughly 49% down into the low single digits. We don't get to zero because there are some technologies that can fake out or take advantage of multi-factor authentication. I will say they're relatively challenging and in most cases just not worth the bad actor effort. So as we're looking at these, and again, financial institutions start to get to be worth the bad actor effort. So getting a good multi-factor solution out there that really does challenge the initial logon is critical. And if we look, there's a couple of different levels of multi-factor authentication before we dig into this. There's typically the email multi-factor authentication response, there's the text, and then there's the app. It's kind of the three most common methods of double checking to make sure somebody's out there or challenging that user. Email, we would probably say, is one of the least effective, because most of the time, if I've already breached your email, then I just get the multi-factor authentication, right? So while it improves the stance, it's not a significant improvement if I've hijacked a machine. Text is typically the next level up. And there are some challenges with text. There's SIM swapping, where I can swap out the SIM numbers and kind of take control of your phone number. Again, hard to do, especially if I'm just sitting in my room. It can be done, but there's a lot to do with that. But at the end of the day, it's an improvement over the email side of things. But if we look at the best step, we typically say, hey, the app side of things, and that can be Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, can be Duo, can be, there's multiple apps out there. The best part about that is you typically have to authenticate into your phone and then authenticate with the app to get the process completed. So it's it's like a multi-factor authentication for multi-factor authentication, versus the text to your phone, which will pop up and just show the number. And if I'm sitting next to you, I might be able to do a little advanced hackery. So now, but all of that said, multi-factor authentication is a basic thing. At the end of the day, the user logs in. Now, traditionally, the login would go to the cloud application. The cloud application would say yes, send back the interface, and the user could start working. But in this case, the cloud application is going to say, hold on, I want to make sure you're really who you said you are. So I'm going to challenge you. And in this instance, I'm challenging you with a text. Now, you're going to have to prompt me back with the information from that text to make sure I can get in. And once that happens with the MFA response, we get in. So this little step, the extra 5 seconds it takes to log in, like we said, decreases those credential hacks from roughly 49% down to low single digits. A huge improvement. And if we tied that to the dollars, and we said 10.2 billion, and we can reduce that by 50% through multi-factor authentication, we can put a significant dent in bad actor revenue. So big step forward. And Jason, there's, to say which is the most popular or most important piece of technology, it can be a hard statement. I agree with you on security awareness training. Multi-factor authentication is right up there as like a 1B to me. It's like right there as an important step.
For sure. And one of the reasons it's so important is because just last year, a bank was fined 4.5 million because they didn't implement MFA on email, which led to a breach. So, it is an important one because it does help things, but it is also one of the things that NYDFS looks for if there is a breach. That is one of the highest things on the list. In fact, they've increased the rules. They just did a new in November, December. They approved some new ruling, which includes enhancing multi-factor authentication. It used to not be required if you were a small business under 10 employees and X amount of dollars. They're removing that requirement. So beginning next year, every organization pretty much needs MFA on everything because they realize how important it is.
That's great, and it significantly reduces challenges. Another area that we can significantly reduce challenges. Now, when we talk about access management, a lot of terms can typically get thrown around: zero trust, privileged access management, identity access management. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to say is, I don't want a certain person or anybody to have access to information they don't need. And I can elevate that one more step of saying, I don't want to have a person access information they don't need until they need it, until the moment that they need it. But we'll just start with level one. I don't want to have people access information that they shouldn't see. So we typically do this through groups, policies. We can do things like access management, which is a software approach where we have to log in from the right information with the right information on the right computer from the right network using the right application. So there's kind of advancements we can make here. But at the end of the day, one of the real important pieces of NYCRR 500 is making sure we limit non-public information view. So by making sure our users have access to only the information that they have to have for their job is a critical step. Because again, if the bad actor gets in and compromises Kai's account, in this situation, they're only getting to general storage. They're going to be able to stay away from finance or HR information, even as the office manager, which would traditionally have access to everything. So if we think then moving on, okay, so we have a couple protection pieces we've talked about. And again, this isn't going to be the holistic view. There are a lot of other technologies that typically come into play. If we shift over to recovery, how do we stay in charge of our restoration at any time? Again, whether it's a cyber attack, a natural disaster, or equipment failure, how do we stay in control? And we'll say you do that by having a great BCDR solution. And a great BCDR solution follows that technology, process, and people very, very well. And one of the processes that doesn't get talked about enough, or at least gets talked about from a kind of a side view, is actually testing it. It's way too often, and we've had this happen personally, where we go to restore an environment and we find out that, yes, they've had green check marks on their backups for the last 5 months, but they have no good recoverable backups. It's been backing up nothing. The bad actor got in and changed the backups to look like they were successful, but they weren't. And we wouldn't know that unless we tested it. So we have to make sure we're testing these environments, checking them, and following those process with people to do the job. So BCDR is critical. And if we think about the process of the data, how we protect that information, 3-2-1 is a strategy that's been around for at least a decade and a half, if not longer. Three copies of your data on 2 different medias, and 1 being offsite. And when we say 2 different medias, it's typically 2 networks because almost everything's network based now. But if you're still doing tapes, you're still doing USB drives as a second piece of backup, and you're putting in a secure facility, we're going to be okay with that, as long as we're getting one far enough away that if we have a natural disaster or equipment failure, I can use that to recover. Now, the old geographic distance used to be 90 miles, kind of just a rule of thumb of if it's 90 miles away, we're probably going to be able to recover from that data. In today's world, that's super easy. A decade ago, it was super hard, but now we're getting easy with that piece, so it's not as challenging. The plus on this is saying if the bad actors are attacking this environment and you have 10 copies of your data, but you don't configure the environment properly, they could affect all of those. They could quickly and easily destroy all of your backups, change your retention, do a lot of things to make it so you can't recover. So we have to have proper configuration of this 3-2-1 environment. And how this looks is we'll have our production, our local, and our offsite backup. And we'll also have things that are in the cloud, like Microsoft and SaaS backup. Things that are in the Microsoft SaaS world or M365 world isn't naturally as protected as we need it to be. Yes, Microsoft can recover an email or a file, but we have time limitations and we have style limitations. So we have to be really careful on trusting that solution too much. We want to be, again, We always want to be in control. So looking at things like SaaS backup and making sure it follows our 3-2-1 process is really critical. So first things first, geographic distance. We need to make sure our local environment is far away from our offsite backup. Again, easy to do today. Next, as our system grows, whether it's SaaS-based or PC-based or in our storage system, we want to make sure that it automatically grows with our local and our offsite backup. It's important to make sure the strategy is in place because it's really easy for production data to grow and not be replicated through. A new server gets spun up, a new folder gets spun up, and automatically isn't included because we haven't quite got that plus part done. And all of a sudden, we're missing a critical piece of our restoration. From there, we got to protect from a breach on the network because if that local backup and that offsite backup is all on the same network with the same credentials and I have admin access, I'm going to get to it and I'm going to change it. I'm going to destroy it, or at least make you think it's still good, but make it unavailable, encrypted, or whatever we're going to do. So we want to use something called immutable storage, and most BCR solutions are going to integrate this today. We want to make sure that those instances cannot be destroyed, cannot be modified, cannot be changed specifically from the production network. They're going to have separate credentials, separate networks, and even they can be built so that if they are deleted, they can automatically be rehydrated. So we want to make sure we're looking at a protection solution that follows all those key metrics. And last but not least, and this is one of the more tougher ones, we want to make sure that if we've established a maximum tolerable downtime for our company, if we've said we have to be back up in 48 hours because of regulation or client needs or revenue, whatever the reason is, if we've established our maximum tolerable downtime, we need to make sure we can recover in that downtime. And we can oftentimes, this geographic distance problem that was easy to solve can come with some very inexpensive storage that's very hard to get out quickly. So we want to make sure that that remote offsite storage has the ability to recover in the time frame that we need. So from there, we're going to start going into our wind down of conversation, and we'll talk about some foundational cybersecurity items. And when we look at these solutions, the idea behind these is they're great general best practices. They align very well with compliance standards like NYCRR 500 in the financial industry. And they help us get the best possible cybersecurity insurance policies available because it can be very expensive without these technologies. We'll highlight a couple of these like incident response plan. We want to make sure we know who to call and what to do if we ever have an issue. And again, this could be as simple as this could be a natural disaster equipment failure or a cybersecurity breach. We will always want to have that response plan ready for us so we can know which steps to take. Again, we can have the technology, but the process and people are critical in this type of situation. We're also going to look at typically managed detection and response, the MDR side. Now, EDR is just a subset of MDR. We didn't talk about that technology today, but endpoint detection and response is an advancement off of antivirus. Now, the difference between the two is antivirus stops known threats, EDR stops known and unknown threats. Now, the managed part of that is just having a SOC, a security operations center, monitor and maintain your EDR solution or your endpoint detection and response solution 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So it's constantly watching that. So if there is an issue, it can alert and respond. Multi-factor authentication, critical. We talked about that a lot today. Security awareness training, critical. We talked about that today. SIM and SOC, security information and event manager, and then attached to that, a security operations center. This oftentimes is required by large entities. And what it's going to do is help get visibility in that 200-day attack to stop it in the middle of the issue. It's going to correlate and pull all that information from all the logs, from all the equipment you have, and say, I feel like there's something going on in the environment because I'm seeing an elevated permissions on this piece of equipment, and I'm seeing access over on this piece of equipment. It can correlate those together, notify the SOC, and stop the attack. So it's a pretty advanced feature, and some industries would need it. Not all do, but it's understanding your specific risk to decide if it's going to help you. And last is that BC. Go ahead.
Going on there, I actually had a client, a large medical facility that we, thankfully we have SOC in place, but their on-site IT missed installing one of the AV on it, but they still got the SOC piece installed, so the logs were still being shipped where they should be. And then I got a call at 1 a.m. on a Saturday, that they saw elevated access. They saw someone export some important registry files. We were able to jump on within 20 minutes, stop it in its tracks, and then do an investigation and validate that, yes, the person got in, but we got them out within 25 minutes. So they didn't get a chance to investigate. They didn't get a chance to do anything. That would not have happened without the SOC. We probably would have missed it, and we would have came in on Monday, and they would have had a day and a half to do everything. So that SOC in this one was the critical factor in that layered defense that got us there. All the other layers were working, but that SOC notification happening so fast, being a phone call to raise it above, raise the attention, instantly got us solving the problem. It stopped the breach from happening and protected that large medical facility. And as we saw, those medical records are the most expensive. So this was a breach that would have been in the millions and millions of dollars, and a chance that this nonprofit hospital would have ceased to exist.
Yeah, it's huge. It's almost like we don't even really talk about SIM anymore unless we talk about it tied to a SOC, because just like technology, it can become out of date so quickly, and the alerts can get out of control if you don't have someone managing and maintaining that and then responding to it when we're not responding. Attacks happen after hours, attacks happen on weekends, attacks happen on holidays. That's when you see a surge. So we got that SOC to make sure we're there for you.
And having that 24/7 support is key. Again, Jason, at 1 o'clock in the morning, you got that, you handled it, woke you up or whatever.
Oh yeah, it was a long weekend. That was not the most fun, but that's the whole point of having the right. That's when I'm talking about the people, having the right people in place. The fact that our staff was able to solve it effectively. We had the right SOC in place because they caught the alert, and the people that they hired were able to do it. So it is as we talk about the tools, it is multiple parts of it, because you could have MDR, but if the MDR isn't doing a good job managing it, then do you really have it? How are you doing any notice? So it is just this constant layering and this pull and tug of, hey, we got something, but we got to double check reporting. The NIST just the other day released their 2.0 guidance on their cyber framework, and the big change is adding governance, because that's the one thing they kind of forgot was like, hey, we should be if you do all this, you've got to pay attention to it and look at it and make sure it's working. And so that's what a lot of these things that were, these foundational things are, making sure it's working, or they're there when it fails, like the incident response plan. That's there for when something fails. The EDR, it's when one of our other layers fail. So that layered defense, it seems like a lot, and it's the biggest struggle I have when I talk with people. It's like, well, why do we need all of this? Well, because hackers and bad actors are smart, and when and it gets downplayed a lot. No one really, we always mention it, but we talk about nation state actors. That means North Korea, Russia, Nigeria. There's governments, divisions of the government that are actively trying to hack us. The North Korea's largest source of funds for the government is stolen funds from the United States via hacking. It is our biggest issue, and so it's tough when we're a small organization or a small bank or even a large organization fighting against North Korea's army effectively. But that's what we are fighting against. The U.S. just this year became the largest target of hacking because of increased efforts from China, from Russia. So it is. Everyone thinks that they're too small where it won't happen to us. The trick is they're not looking who you are. Their system just flagged a vulnerability, and they're like, "Cool, we're going to go in and investigate." If you're too small, then what they'll do is just encrypt your stuff and walk away, and then wait for a payment. I had a small their backups weren't encrypted. This is when I was working in a bank, and I got the call like, how do we get cryptocurrency? Because we need to pay the ransom. And as the bank, we effectively told them not to do it, but they're like, we are not going to exist. So they paid $37,000. They actually got their data back, but they just were out $37,000, and a month, their backups were over a month old. And, they lost clients, they lost reputation. all because they kind of thought they were too small. But that's not the case. You're always worth something, because the question is, what is it worth for your organization to open the doors tomorrow? Not just your data, but for you to exist, for you to service your customers. Because any of these events can stop them from happening.
Absolutely. Great points. Great points. Thank you, Jason. So yeah, so if we look at like some of these attacks that these bad actors are doing, if we think of a fake email attack or a phishing attack, we're going to rely on security awareness training to protect us. If you think of password theft, we're going to use multi-factor authentication to protect us. General exploits, and these could be vulnerabilities in software and hardware, assessments and action. So we're going to say we need to assess the environment so we know what's out there. And once we know what's out there, we can patch it, replace it, especially if it's end of life. We need to take action to avoid the risk of general exploits. Data ransom, one of the most common ones, a BCDR solution. If we're in control and we can recover within our maximum tolerable downtime, we don't have to pay those bad actors. And the last thing is data extortion. And that's going to help. We're going to help that with access management. If we limit the scope of data that everybody can access to what they have to have, we can really limit the potential extortion. Now, we're not going to stop it. Again, our goal here is just to try and say, well, if we have an incident, how do we minimize the potential breach? So wrapping this up, right? Jason, you crushed it with everyone as a target. We'll often say, I mean, the way we say it is very similar to what you just said, but by not thinking you're a target, you become more of a target because you don't put the solutions in place that defend today. If you have an email address, if you have a computer, you are being attacked. There is no question about that. So unfortunately, the days of I'm too small, that's just not a thing. So we're all being attacked. Building a layered defense, again, so we can stop things at incident at the worst case. If we have a layered defense that's right for your business, we can add multiple layers of nets in there to stop the bad actor from getting in. So as an example, I click a link with my security awareness training on accident. It starts to encrypt my system or the drives, but MDR kicks in and stops it. So that's like an example of a layered defense. And the last, probably most important thing is understanding your specific risks, understanding your equipment, understanding the challenges with that equipment, your industry, your data, all of those modify and change the specific risks you have. So doing a true risk assessment, vulnerability assessment of your environment is really the only way to understand what level of target you are and what defense you need. So from there, we will jump in and we are happy to take any questions that you have.
And don't make it easy on us, everybody. We handle difficult, easy questions. I know it's a lot of material. And we hope we found it was informative.
I know one question that we get quite a bit is, how do I know what technology I have? We know that in 2022, roughly 20% of the IT industry turned over. Salaries were going crazy and people were just leaving. So we had a lot of knowledge out there just leave organizations, and new people coming in, great. We try to get up to speed, but we could have lost documentation because businesses are typically atrociously underdocumented. Sorry, that's one of the great things about MSPs is we're required to do it as part of the way we operate. But how do we know? And that's where these assessments come in. And I know that you guys do network security, risk, vulnerability, you do all these assessments. It's kind of the phase one. How does someone typically engage in where do they typically start with that kind of process?
And so once they engage with us, and then we start, we've got a nice set of tools that we deploy that can help scan the environment for vulnerabilities, scan for your assets. We also have developed questionnaires to help you with that risk assessment. So we're going to look at more than just your network devices. We're going to talk about business processes, because as we said, there's the people, the processes, and the technology. So we're going to be looking at all portions of that. As we talked about organizations needing the CISO, the cybersecurity professionals, we have everyone on staff that has those credentials. So we have multiple CISSPs on staff, and those are one of the highest levels you can get for cybersecurity. Not only does it say the stuff, but it says you've been working in the field a minimum of 5 years before you can even get that. So it's, we've got this layered approach that we can do to an assessment that can really scale based on your size and your need, because you might only need to assess a small portion. So it's really just engaging with Andy. He can be your point of contact. He can get you everything that you need, and then we can come in and do some scans, generate some reports, and find the best ways that we can improve your cybersecurity and security postures.
Yeah, on top of that, Jason, thanks. I just want to add that obviously everyone that's on the call will receive a $100 gift card. But on top of that, and my CEO's on, I think, we're not, we're also going to provide a complimentary risk assessment just because of this thing that comes up in April. We want to educate everybody. So on top of the gift card, we're also going to throw in, and I sound like a salesman, I'm sorry, a complimentary risk assessment, and I'll discuss that down, in the next week or so. So I just wanted to say that as well.
That's a great offer. We don't hear that very often. So
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm saying my CEO is not on the call, but anyway, he's bought into this, and we provided that risk assessment to other prospective prospective clients. So we're willing to extend that through the end of March. So I'll be in touch, with all the attendees, and we'll send the cards right out to everybody.
awesome. Well, I'll just leave with one thought from our side. A lot of questions we get are, we hear about this all the time. We hear the technology professionals consistently talking about these challenges. There's so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt or FUD out there. How do we really know where we're at? And you hear a lot of these challenges because, unfortunately, Jason, myself, Andrew, we see this, unfortunately, on an everyday basis. We see companies become hacked, become vulnerable, the fear, the cost, all the stuff we're just trying to do everything we can to avoid that from happening to your business. And yes, this is a service we're offering. We're trying to protect and help organizations. But unfortunately, it's very real and it's growing rapidly. AI is making it much easier, like Jason said, to do certain attacks that are easy to fool a lot of people. So these next steps are really critical, making sure, like you guys said, offering that risk assessment is huge. And then going from there to find out what holes you can fill easily. But I just want to say thank you, guys, for letting us speak. We really appreciate this today.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone, for joining.